For people to join us here at the Impact Festival 2020. Good morning, everyone. As those who join on Zoom might want to introduce themselves on the chat. We'll be starting in about 1 minute. We'll just wait for a few more people to join us here at the Impact Festival 2020. Welcome, especially those joining on Zoom. If you'd like to introduce yourselves in the chat, we'll be starting in just a moment. So welcome everybody to the Impact Festival 2020, where over 5 weeks the Centre for Homelessness Impact and their partners are creating a space to meet, explore ideas, learn new skills and build a shared sense of what we can achieve in homelessness in the coming months and years. The theme for this year's festival is accelerating impact, and it's a particularly pressing theme given the huge changes that have been made in 2020 in response to the coronavirus. This session, which is entitled Work as a Priority in Preventing and Ending Homelessness, will build upon the theme by exploring the vital role that work and employment support can play in preventing homelessness. I'm delighted to be chairing today's session. My name is Anna Dixon. I am Chief Executive of the Centre for Ageing Better. We're a charitable foundation working to improve later lives across England, and we are a fellow What Works Centre together with the Centre for Homelessness Impact. And we therefore try and influence policy and practice using evidence and research. I'm joined today by a fantastic panel, which I will briefly introduce and who we will be then hearing from in turn. Our first speaker is going to be Chris Wright, Chief Executive of Catch 22. Then we will hear from Nazreen Visram, Head of Charities and Citizenship at the Public Sector team at Barclays, a partner with Catch 22. Then we're going to hear from Seb Barker, co-founder and chief operating officer at Beam. And they are an organisation that crowdfunds new career opportunities for homeless men and women. And then finally, Tim Gray, who is a homelessness consultant with over 30 years experience working for a range of organisations, including central and local government, the voluntary sector and housing associations. So a brilliant panel and lots to discuss. Please do feel free to chat during the session. If you would like, however, to pose a question to the panel, please use the Q&A and you'll find that button at the bottom of your screen in the center if you are on Zoom. So I will be looking at the Q&A and during that part of the session, I will draw on some but may not get to all of your questions and pose them to our panel. So I think without further ado, I think I just need to also encourage you, if you're watching on YouTube or on Zoom, if you'd like to participate in Twitter, there is a hashtag for the festival, which is CHIFest 2020, hashtag CHIFest 2020. So please do get involved in the conversation there as well. So I think that's all in terms of introductions. So I'd now like to ask Chris Wright to kick off our panel with his opening remarks. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Anna, and good morning, everybody. It's very good to be here. Sadly, the issues we're here to discuss are likely to become even more acute over the coming months. In June, 649,000 fewer people were in payroll employment than in March. Also in June, there were 520,000 16 to 24-year-olds claiming unemployment benefit, which was an increase on 280,000 against March's figures last year. So the impact of COVID-19 on the general population's employment prospects is going to be significant. But what will it do? What will it also do is push those who are currently furthest away from the labour market even further away. People with barriers to employment, such as homelessness, will need specific support. Programs like the government's 2.5 billion Kickstart programme are to be welcomed, but it does need kickstarting, and all of us need to ensure that it reaches out to those groups who could be most scarred by the impact of long-term unemployment. At Catch-22, we need to be thinking hard with our partners such as Barclays as to how we can build on our existing partnerships to design and deliver meaningful programs aimed at those who are given the likely scale of a recession we're entering into, who could most easily be forgotten. However, before I set out the work we undertake through the Barclays Connect with Work programme, let me provide a quick overview of Catch-22 and our wider work. Although operating under a modern name, Catch-22 traces its roots back to the late 18th century, when we were first established as a philanthropic society committed to solving one of the challenges of the day, housing and educating the children of felons on the streets of London. Our founders felt that the best approach was to try and get these children and young people into meaningful employment and place them with tradespeople to learn a trade. They were committed to the spirit of charity and the principles of trade, and these twin themes underpin our work today. Although constitutionally a charity, we define ourselves as a social business. We operate across the welfare spectrum, cradle to career, delivering a range of public services across England and in Wales. We run special schools, children's social care services, justice services, victim care, vocational training, including apprenticeships and employability support. And we have a simple philosophy which underpins all of our work. It's that relationships matter. And our theory of change is based on three basic principles: people, place, and purpose. The three things the majority of us accept as the basis of a good life: good people around us, somewhere safe to live, and something useful to do with our lives. Last year, the Catch-22 group touched the lives of over 100,000 people. Catch-22 is primarily funded through government contracts, but we've also developed several deep strategic partnerships with a number of corporate partners, strongly committed to improving outcomes for those we support. One such partner is Barclays. Catch-22 has been working in partnership with Barclays since 2016 on a programme called Connect with Work. Barclays link us to their customers, and through this value chain, we work together to help create jobs for those we support. The programme currently operates in London, Manchester, and Liverpool, and the aim of the programme is to assist people with barriers to work to move into quality training and employment. We provide community outreach, pre-employability support, and create a tailored career plan, which is essentially strengths-based. What are you good at? And looks at the barriers: housing, substance misuse, mental health, and how we can address these barriers together. Since 2016, close to 3,000 people have engaged with Catch-22 Barclays Connect with Work programme. Of these, 11% have described a mental health problem, 44% see themselves as having lack of education attainment at school is a barrier to work. 28% have identified themselves as from Black and ethnic minority population, and 10% of a criminal conviction. There are three key things that make the programme work. One, community outreach. Advisors work out in the community with probation teams, care leaver teams, Job Centre Plus. We meet people on their own ground and we don't ask them to come to us. Secondly, one-to-one relationships. The strength of the programme is the relationship between advisors and the people we support. They help build confidence and self-belief. And thirdly, and really importantly, it's work with employers. We have to work on both sides of the employment barrier, with individuals and employers. We run job fairs, challenge recruitment practices, work with managers, supervisors, ask the question, do these jobs really need 5 GCSEs? By screening out people with convictions, are you limiting talent your company needs? Without good imaginative engagement with employers, programs such as this don't work. We find that employers do want to help those with barriers. They just need assistance themselves in taking the leap. And there is plenty of evidence of increased employee loyalty when employees feel that their employer has given them a chance. So over the last few months, we've also had to pivot to somewhat remote delivery as a consequence of COVID, exploring activities like virtual workshops. We recently ran a workshop with Barclays volunteers, helping candidates with their own LinkedIn profiles. And in other programs, such as our Google-funded Social Switch virtual work experience, where young people shadow professionals online. But often our work is distinctly practical. Let me tell you briefly about Maureen. Maureen has 2 children. She's deaf and a migrant. And when Catch-22 met Maureen, she was about to be evicted from her house. Maureen had a background in TV broadcasting and journalism, but she couldn't find a job. I was struggling to find a job to the point of frustration and tears. Every job she applied for asked for a phone interview. She found this difficult because she's deaf. So we acted fast. We worked with multiple organisations, and alongside a housing association, we found Maureen a hostel to stay in, but she couldn't take all her belongings. So we found her a storage unit and paid for it. We spoke with various agencies and helped her find work in a major retail company. And we paid for training and her first 2 weeks to travel. Just very simple, practical things that you need to help people overcome some basic barriers to employment. So in advance of today's session, we spoke to a few of our colleagues on the ground, and we asked what they've been witnessing over the last few months. There was a sense that there is a real gap in support for homeless people, that many homeless people are not eligible to join the same programs as those who are not homeless. A high proportion of young people who are sofa surfing and living within hostels, and many young people are giving up their accommodation to move back with family due to less or no income. And a high proportion of homeless people on caseloads also have English as a second language and are unable to communicate and engage in social services to support them. So the context is pretty difficult out there for many. And I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and great to also hear the sort of personal story and the difference that Catch-22 and the Connect with Work programme can make for people. So now I'd like to ask the partner in this, who obviously been instrumental in their support for Connect with Work, to ask Nazreen to give her reflections on the partnership and the importance of this programme. Thank you, Nazreen.
Thank you very much, Anna, and good morning, everyone. Yes, my name's Nazreen. I head up charities team at Barclays and also citizenship for our public sector team. And I just want to explain my role a bit, because just often when people hear head of charities, they automatically think of the partnership side. But I actually look after the banking relationships of charities across the UK. So we are sort of the #1 bank to the charity sector. So we're sort of really supporting charities at the moment during this pandemic in navigating the detrimental impact that it's had on their sector. But prior to coming into this role, which was around sort of 18 months ago, I was head of citizenship for the corporate bank. And I was very much at the inception of the Connect with Work programme. So I was kind of there when we were thinking about how do we create real social impact, because employability has been one of our key strategic themes at Barclays. So you would have heard of life skills, for example, or 5 million young futures, which was one of our previous programmes. But we really wanted to take this to the next level. So I was sort of in that role at the time when we were thinking, right, who are going to be our charity partners? How do we find this expertise? And how do we move this forward? As Chris mentioned, 2016, the partnership started with Catch-22 and various other partners actually. And my role in Connect with Work has been many. So at the inception, I've also been part of the kind of colleague engagement, the mentoring, supporting these people, giving them the job skills, giving them the confidence to be able to get back into work, but also I would say from the client side. So the beauty of the corporate banking business at Barclays is we work across a multitude of sectors and we're very sector specialist. So, as well as having charities, we have hospitality and leisure, retail, manufacturing, business services. And we have, thousands and thousands of clients who are looking for to change their recruitment strategies, who are looking for entry-level jobs. So the partnership works so beautifully well because we have access to those clients, and then we can help with our sort of bankers to get those people in interviews with our clients. And I think that's why it works so well. We published our impact report last year, and Chris touched on some of the metrics. Close to 3,000 placed into work or connected with. We've got a 73% sustainability rate in the first 6 months, which is excellent actually. If you think about, if I look at some of the stats across our sort of graduate programs, for example. But I'm just going to take a quote from Chris actually, which was written in that report as to why this partnership works. And he mentions transparency, mutual respect, and shared goal. And I think that actually sums up why this partnership is amazing in terms of the impact, but why it works. And I think, we're in an environment now where COVID-19 has had such a detrimental impact on everything that we're doing, right from working from home to how we interact with each other. And most of this work that we're doing, obviously, with Connect with Work has been face-to-face and very hands-on. And now technology is probably the way that this has got to change. But again, that poses barriers as well, because a lot of the communities that we work with don't have access to technology or don't even have a phone. And so, how do we navigate that? Is it now a three-way partnership where we work with another organisation? So I think we've got to be really creative in the way we now think about moving forward. I think corporate citizenship and corporate partnerships, when you look at partnering with charities, it's really about co-creation and collaboration. It really is a partnership. I would say why it works is because it's got clear measures and KPIs, and that's we're a bank. At the end of the day, we like to measure everything, and and it's been a real journey. I think Chris would allude to in getting to getting those metrics and how we measure them. But I think that the one key thing is having those shared values and understanding each other's drivers, and aligning our objectives. So we've got the expertise of someone like Catch-22 who understand the community, who understand employability, and then you've got Barclays who've got scale and reach. But it's not just a programme that sits at the senior level of our organisation. It's a programme that everyone has bonded with across the organisation, right down to colleagues in the branches, right up to our CEO. So I think that's why it really works, because everyone can take part, can be active and build sort of that emotional bond with the programme, and hence why it works. So, it's been a real, really amazing to see the progress. I think the next challenge for all of us is how do we take it forward in this kind of pandemic? And now I think it's time to really think outside the box and think about what partnership looks like going forward.
Thank you so much, Nazreen, and also thank you to Barclays for your commitment to employability, not only this programme, but as you mentioned, a series of programmes looking across the life course, both at youth employability, but also at some of the challenges that older workers face as well in getting back into employment. So and it's great to hear about the commitment across the organisation and how you're not only bringing your staff along, but also some of your customers, as Chris was talking about. So we'll hopefully hear more about that partnership and the work that you're doing as part of the discussion. But we're going to move now to Seb, who's going to talk to us about some of the impact that Beam is having for individuals who they are supporting and getting into work. So Seb.
Hi everyone, really nice to meet you. Yeah, I'm Seb. I work for a social enterprise called Beam, and at Beam we believe a couple of things. The first is that for some people that are either homeless or at risk of homelessness, that good quality employment is the best long-term solution to that problem. And we also believe that we can kind of use technology to really safely and easily involve communities in the solution to that problem. So I'm just going to kind of quickly show you what this looks like. Can you see my screen, Anna?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Cool. So yeah, this is someone called Abby, amazing lady who would have worked with one of Beam's partner organisations. So we work with a lot of really great charities like St Mungo's and Centrepoint, and also some local authorities as well. And they'll obviously support thousands of homeless people. And where someone is interested in looking for employment, they will refer them to us. So we will work with Abby to create a campaign page on our website, exactly like the one I'm showing you now. So when Abby first comes to Beam, she'll get a caseworker in our team, and that person's job is really to help her build a very personalised career plan that really aligns with her strengths and interests. So people can use Beam for anything at all, providing there's a realistic chance of finding work in that area. So we have a picture of the person, as we do with Abby there, and then we use the campaign partly to allow them to really tell their story in their words. So this gives her the opportunity to kind of talk about where she's been, but perhaps more importantly, where she wants to get to through the money that she's looking to raise. And then you can see what we're doing here is we are using the power of the crowd really to remove all financial barriers that that person faces to employment. So Chris mentioned earlier, I think it's a really great point that sometimes these very small things can actually pose really, really profound barriers to people. So if people don't have a laptop or a smartphone, we'll help them raise the money for it. Of course, training is there. And if people have any housing related costs, we'll also look to fund those as well. So this is completely unique to each person. We itemize them all on the page, and then we go out to the community to fund it. So the average campaign size for someone on Beam is about £3,000, and that normally funds in just under 4 weeks. And then you can see that there's this other really powerful effect that goes along with the crowdfunding. So of course, people come to us because they need financial help, but they get this amazing confidence boost from this huge community of people that really want to see them do well. So along with the donations they're leaving, they leave personalized messages of support, responding to their story that then gets sent through to the homeless person. So along with raising the money, they'll get this real confidence boost. And then they'll stay in touch throughout the journey. So Abby will post updates. You can see that she's completed her training and has now started work. So she'll write a short update, which we'll send out to the people that have donated, and they can come and comment and like on the post. So it kind of continues that really positive relationship. And of course, it also surfaces local opportunities as well. So if someone's training to be a plumber, we often have plumbers get in touch that say they're able to offer the person work experience or introductions to employers. So that's the kind of public-facing side of what we do, but we also have a really great services layer. So the caseworker that I mentioned earlier doesn't stop supporting the person at the point we've launched their campaign. They buy the items on their behalf, so that money stays in our charity bank account. It doesn't go directly to them. So we'll organise delivery of things like laptops, purchase of training. We'll stay in touch with them through the training, and then we work with a wide spectrum of different employer partners like the NHS, Ocado, and help them into employment. And then we'll stay in touch for 6 months. So if someone does lose their job in that time, we'll help them find another one. So that's the model in a nutshell. And also a lot like Barclays, we really like measuring our social impact and kind of tracking the work we're doing. So we built this part of the website, which we call our transparency dashboard. And what that does is aggregate all of the data to do with both our social impact, but also the money we're raising on Beam. So you can see there, since we launched at the end of 2017, we've had 287 campaigns fund. So that's 287 homeless people who have funded this kind of really life-changing training. We've had over £1 million in donations. So we haven't spent any money on marketing. That's really been sort of word of mouth and people kind of telling their friends about it, coupled with the fact that when the homeless people go into work, many of them choose to give back. So they'll set up a monthly donation. It doesn't have to be much. It can be £5, £10. And so the people using Beam today are supported by those that were using it maybe 1-2 years ago. We've had just over 100 people start work. 74% of them sustain it. So as we mentioned earlier, that's much higher stats compared to a lot of national programs. I think DWP's work program is at about 31%. So again, really speaks to the better quality outcomes you can have when you use a very personalized model. And then we also track data around what careers people are doing, the referrals, where they come from, and of course, diversity data as well. So the different gender and ethnicity splits of people using Beam. So yeah, really happy to answer any questions on this after we've all finished doing the introductions. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Seb. And really amazing. I hadn't heard of Beam before, and I'm sure many people really impressed by the personalized way which you're approaching the support, but also the transparency of the impact you're having, and certainly look like good outcomes. Our experience, like yours, that is that the government's employment support work programme has some pretty rotten outcomes, particularly for the age group we look at, people sort of 50 to state pension age. And again, because they face multiple barriers, as we've heard about, they do really need that sort of more personalised support approach that you're obviously adopting at Beam. So I'd be interested if you do have some older clients that you're working with as well to see what the outcomes are like for them. So I'm sure we'll come to some questions in a moment. But before we do, I'd like to turn to our final panellist, Tim Gray, to give a few remarks. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, thanks very much, Anna. It's great to be here, and very inspiring to hear the people who've spoken before me about the programs that we're doing. I've been involved in sort of homelessness and to some extent employment programs in homelessness for quite a long time. And just lately, I've been doing a piece of work looking at the evidence around homelessness and employment. So I just want to say a little bit about that, really. Now, one thing that's important to realise is that not everybody who becomes homeless is actually unemployed. So if you look at the statistics for England, where they publish these things, then actually about 30% of the people who are accepted as being owed a homelessness duty in the last quarter that statistics were available for were at work. About half of those were in part-time work, and about half of those were in full-time work. So there's a real issue, as a few people have alluded to, in terms of the sort of work that people get. Is it good work? Is it sustainable work? Is it the sort of work that is going to, if you have a shock, if your landlord wants to evict you, if you're staying with someone and they decide to throw you out, are you going to have enough financial resources, stability to be able to source accommodation for yourself and get out of that situation? Because it's when you're not often that people actually become homeless, and homelessness varies an awful lot in terms of the sort of people that we're talking about. So again, if you look at the stats, but getting on for half of people who are accepted as statutorily homeless in both England and Scotland presents as having no extra support needs, if you like. Often it's families with children. And they don't necessarily have mental health problems or drug problems or any of these things. It's because they don't have enough income. But on the other hand, there's another end to the spectrum where people are really far from the labour market. If you look at rough sleepers, more than half of them do have a drug problem or a mental health problem or an alcohol problem. So we're not talking about sort of one size fits all here. We're talking about a spectrum of people, some of whom, if you can get them into temporary accommodation that's reasonably stable, may be able to find their own accommodation, their own employment, having perhaps recently left it, perhaps with the support of an existing government programme. But another set of people who it's pretty clear that a lot of the government programmes don't really work for effectively. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, generally speaking, the types of barriers that are identified in terms of homeless people getting employment are things like, well, a lack of stable housing doesn't help. It's very hard to gain or sustain work without a stable place to live. There's a whole thing about work disincentives with rents being so high, often nowadays, that you don't necessarily keep a lot of the money that you earn, even with universal credit, which has a lower taper than housing benefit used to do. It's still a 63% taper on the money that you earn above the minimum threshold that you don't get to keep. A lot of people do have vulnerabilities and support needs. A lot of people who are homeless have low educational attainment, lack of skills, numeracy, and so on, digital skills. Some people just have very little work experience, and so it's difficult for them to get jobs for that reason. Criminal record can be a problem. A lot of people have poor self-esteem and self-confidence, so people don't feel ready or able, or they're worried about going into work. And if you're on a disability benefit and you're going to work, it can feel very risky, I think, to do that. And because, what if it doesn't work out? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to me then? And there can be discrimination because somebody's been homeless. So there's those sort of issues. And it's important that we do try to get people good work, because the evidence is that despite the high sustainment rates for 6 months on the two programs that we've heard about, there is quite a lot of evidence that people who do get jobs through things like the work program, work and health program, and other homelessness programs that have been evaluated, don't necessarily raise their income very much, and don't necessarily sustain employment for very long. So you can be, if you're not careful, you can be trapped into a cycle of sort of in and out of fairly low paid work, particularly with a very liberalised labour market that we have now, where you can have 0 hours contracts and so on. So I think it's really important to work with people to make sure that it's jobs that actually they want to do, it's jobs that they can sustain, and that there's help available if people don't manage to do that, to keep them on the straight and narrow. And that, you don't run this risk actually that can happen where somebody gets a job, they lose some of their entitlement to housing benefit or universal credit, they lose their job, and it all sort of falls apart because they hadn't handled it properly. The budgeting is much more difficult, and actually the risk of homelessness could be greater. So I think that follow-on support is very important. In terms of evidence for what works, there's quite a lot. It's very hard to get clear comparisons between different programs for homeless people, for example, because the starting place is so different. You're always working with a different client group who are different distances from the labour market. You're working with people who are, in a different place or situation in terms of the job market in that area and so on. So it's hard to do it very objectively. I mean, the sorts of things that are evidence as being helpful are really the need to build trusted relationship with an advisor. An advisor who can motivate you, can get you involved, really want you to believe in yourself, feel that you can get work, feel that you can pursue it, is really helpful. It can be helpful to engage people in places that they're familiar with. So rather than have to go off to an unfamiliar building that they don't know, actually doing something in a place that they can get used to, that they feel supported in, can be helpful. Flexibility to provide bespoke and tailored provision to meet individual or group needs can be very helpful. It's interesting to hear Beam there talking about you building a career plan with an individual around their personal hopes and circumstances. Volunteering can be helpful as a stepping stone, although it's important that we don't have people volunteering for long periods and not paying them when we should be paying them for working, but that can be helpful. And active brokerage with employers, as I think Chris said, is absolutely key, particularly for people who are further from the labour market. I think it's been shown that it's very important that you get employers on side and work with them so that they understand you and the client understands them, and the support is going to be available for that person while they're continuing employment. The one model that has got some quite good randomized control evidence is the individual placement and support model, which has been evaluated a lot in the US, but also in Europe. And basically, that's something that's been pioneered in mental health, and they work with really quite severely ill mental health patients. It's very linked to the sort of clinical setting. They have a policy of not excluding anybody who wants help. They have a policy of working with that person to find the sort of job they'd be interested in, and active employer engagement, and in theory, time unlimited support after they've gained employment, and training and so on tends to be in work after they've got a job rather than before work, preparing people for a job. So in that sense, it's a little bit like Housing First, rather than get somebody ready before they move into accommodation, you get somebody into accommodation and you work with them when they're there. It's a sort of similar principle, if you like, with IPS. And that's been shown to be about twice as effective as training-based models. So I think I've probably said enough, although I could say a lot more. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tim, and I'm sure we'll have time in the discussion to come back to some of those points, but really interesting to hear your sort of review of the evidence in terms of what features of employment support look to be successful. I have to say that list sounded quite familiar from the evidence review that we have done, looking as well at what might work for older workers who face multiple barriers. So we're going to open up for discussion. So I don't know, maybe we sort of switch mode here in terms of people, the panelists opening up their mics so we can make it a bit more of a conversation. And please do sort of wave at me if you want to come in on any of the points or questions, or come back on anything that other panelists have said. I think a couple of you have made the point about the need to work on both sides, to work with employers as well as with the individuals. And I wondered if we could hear a little bit more, Chris, from you, and then from Nazreen, about the importance and what you've been doing to try and engage employers in being sort of ready, and what it's going to take from them to take on some of these individuals, and indeed what the benefits are to them of doing so. So I don't know whether, Chris, you might kick off, and then we'll come to Nazreen. Thanks,
Anna. And it was good to hear Tim suggest as well that there's a lot of kind of evidence which underpins this. It's self-evident to me that employers employers want good employees. It's simple as that. But they also need to understand what it takes to get a good employee. And sometimes all you need to do is explain, get alongside, talk about this in terms of business risk. So most employers take risks every single day in their working environment, and the risk of taking on an employee is no different from any other kind of big business risk. They just need to think it through sensibly about how they mitigate those risks. And organizations like ours and others can provide some support, wraparound support to the employee, to give the employer confidence that, by giving somebody a chance, that they're likely to be working alongside a very loyal, committed employee. It sounds so simple, a lot of this is just about talking to people, explaining about circumstances, context, that most people, all of us, have issues in our lives, and we need a bit of support now and again to help us navigate those difficulties. And, what we're finding is employers are really willing to engage with that issue. Employers want to do this. They want to have good, loyal, committed employees. And I think we're also in a really interesting kind of phase, demographically. I think there's a much greater awareness and commitment from employers as to their responsibility to the communities in which they work. And so we're pushing out an open door, I think.
Great. Nazreen. Have we got Nazreen? I'm not sure. Maybe.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Can you hear
Great.
me?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
So yeah, I think, we have relationships with, as I mentioned, thousands of clients across different sectors, across Barclays, and all our relationship directors who manage those relationships, we've really engaged them with the Connect with Work process. And when they go out to see their clients, they talk very passionately about Connect with Work and the benefits that it can bring to their clients' organisations. So that's really, we've really leveraged those relationships, and I think that's why the Connect With programme really, really works. I also say, when I talk to my clients, they're looking to also, diversity is one of the key areas they're trying to focus on, and actually this programme automatically and naturally delivers diversity. They want to make positive impacts in their local community, so employing locally is often really important to them. And I've got to say that obviously Brexit poses, some real employability issues to certain sectors where they rely heavily on people from the EU, and we've been able to help fill some of that, gap with particular sectors like hospitality and leisure or manufacturing, for example. So I think there's a real commercial angle and there's a real community angle, and that's why it works. And some of the clients that we've been working with, we've seen some amazing results, and actually I refer to our impact report, which happy to share, gives some really great beautiful case studies of how this has really, really helped our clients with their sort of employability strategy and journey. But as Chris said, it's just having a discussion, getting them to think differently, and think about different ways in which they can employ, and that's why the programme is working.
Great. Thank you for those reflections. There's been a few questions posted. I'd like to come to those and just encourage any others who have questions to put them in now, so that we can make time to come to them. So I think, Seb, you've generated a lot of interest in Beam. As I said, it was really fascinating to hear about it. A couple of questions, really just, are you nationwide yet, or is this only in London? And a bit more about who are the supporters and how do they get involved, and how are you recruiting them? So I think general interest to find out a little bit more about Beam, if you wanted to say a couple of words on that, Seb.
Yeah, for sure. So we are only based in London at the moment. We're looking to expand over the back end of this year and into next year. So if anyone at the conference works elsewhere, is interested in bringing Beam to their area, please get in touch. My email is seb@beam.org, so hopefully pretty easy to remember, and I'll stick it in the chat afterwards. And yeah, in terms of the supporters, they are overwhelmingly members of the public. So individuals, the average donation size, about £25. So how they've heard about it, as I briefly mentioned earlier, there's been a really good kind of network effect with people recommending it to their friends, and sharing their own impact pages of people they supported or campaigns on social media. Other people hear about it and then come and donate. We also encourage people to give monthly. So often people will have a monthly subscription, which is unusual for crowdfunding, but of course quite normal in the world of charity donations. So that means we know there's a certain amount of funding coming through the website each month, and it means that every single person's campaign can fund. So we make sure that our promise to people that are using Beam is that they don't have to do anything promotional to raise the money. We'll do that for them. We've had a lot of really good press. People have heard about it in that. So we've been in the Guardian, Evening Standard, and other publications. So when people read about it, often about one of the people that have used Beam, they then come and donate. And yeah, that's kind of where we are at the moment. Just to briefly pick up on one other question that came in around safeguarding, which I think is a really, really excellent point. So from a really early stage of Beam, we were keen to help people who couldn't have a photo online for whatever reason. Often that is people who are fleeing domestic violence and in a refuge. So in those cases, we anonymize the campaign completely. So there'll be no photo up, and we use a pseudonym. People can still raise the money and obviously get that backing of a community of supporters.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that, and we look forward to following your expansion as you successfully demonstrate your impact and hopefully attract more interest. So, Tim, coming back to you, I think you raised some really important points about the quality of work, and obviously, as part of that, the ability to therefore then sustain. And I'm guessing it's mostly in the private rented sector, the sort of affordability of that if people have got fluctuating income or fluctuating work. So a couple of questions here really, who defines what's good work in terms of government? And then also just really thinking about, how can we help people sort of face the reality as well that perhaps their housing that they might have previously had, they just can't afford the standard of housing. And I think we've particularly seen in just some of the data on older homelessness, which I think according to Shelter for the 60 plus went up by more than 40% in the last 5 years. So seeing quite a significant increase. And linked to that, I can't, but obviously one of the main reasons is to do with the sort of private rental tenancies coming to an end, but also particularly for older homeless, redundancy and family breakdown, or having poor health and disability, which might affect people's ability to continue to work and therefore to continue to pay rent. So a lot of linked things here: increase in private renting, affordability of private rent, insecurity of private rent, and insecurity of work. Quite a difficult sort of context in which people are trying to manage. So, Tim, what are your sort of reflections on what do we define as good work, and what more can we do to sort of help people in this situation?
Yeah. Okay, well, in terms of good work, I don't think there is a single definition of it, and to some extent it's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, if somebody is doing a job that they feel happy and settled in doing, then perhaps that makes it good work. I mean, the government has sort of recognised this. There was a sort of evidence review a long time ago, before 2010, that looked at is work good for you? What they found pretty unequivocally is that work is good for you. If you've been unemployed and you get employed again, if you basically in any circumstances for any group of people, for the majority of those people, work is a good thing in terms of increased health and well-being. But they do make the distinction that if you have to be respected, you have to have some idea that work is going to continue. I guess it has to be enough for you to be able to sort of meet your financial obligations in some way. So it's those kinds of things that make work good. And there is some evidence from America that actually people are in and out of jobs and feel very insecure in that work. It may even be worse for their mental health and well-being than being in work. So I don't think it's something that you can say, well, it's a neat definition, but I think it's the sort of thing where you'll probably all think in terms of something that you actually want to do that's reasonably stable, where you're being treated with respect while you're there, and that you can expect to sustain for a period. Interestingly, there's a study that came out in very recently from Cambridge University and Salford University that looked at how much work do you need to do in order to improve your mental health. And what it came to, interestingly, they looked at longitudinal study of 77,000 people over several years. So it's not a sort of fly-by-night study. They found that if you can do 1 day of work in a week, that's actually maybe the optimum, or at least it doesn't get any better after that in terms of improving your mental health. Now, of course, 1 day work isn't going to give you enough income to live on, but in terms of so that I think is interesting in terms of less work to go around and potentially shorter working weeks going forward if we ever get to the stage where we can sort that out. On what do you do if you don't have enough income to sustain accommodation in the private rented sector? Well, I think it's tough, isn't it? I mean, the government has helped a little bit by improving the local housing allowance rates from April back to the 30th percentile, and I think you do get this thing sometimes in homelessness, that homelessness can be counter-cyclical. So sometimes you know, rather than you get more homelessness when everybody's out of work, it can be the other way round to some extent, because when there's less, when everybody's in work and the economy is going up, there's more pressure on rents to rise. Everybody wants property, everybody's buying into the market. And so there's less reason for landlords to want to let somebody who is, you know, more on the margins of that. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, although clearly there's a big risk of more homelessness because of unemployment as we go forward, as Chris was mentioning at the beginning. I mean, what do you do? I don't know. You might be able to negotiate with your landlord to see if in the circumstances they're willing to accept a low rent. If you're rented in local housing allowance levels, you know, then you should be claiming universal credit if you're entitled to it to top up your income, although you will lose quite a bit of your income if you do that. Yeah, maybe some people who are older, a lot of people in social housing, there's quite a lot of impetus for people to downsize if they're older, isn't there? Because then it frees up a larger accommodation for other people who might have larger households. Doesn't really work quite that way in the private rented sector, though, I don't think. And so I don't think there's an easy answer to it. I think one should look and be realistic. And if you're not going to be able to afford to sustain your employment and sustain your accommodation over the longer term, get back into work, then maybe you do need to be thinking earlier on about planning to do something about that, rather than waiting until it gets to the point where you're absolutely in crisis. So I'd say take it seriously and plan for it, but I don't think there's a magic solution one can offer.
Would any of the other panelists like to come in on this point? No, I'm not seeing them all jumping up. So I'll move us on to a question that I had back to the Barclays project Connect with Work. Around values and metrics. So you talked, Nazreen, that this had been quite tough in settling on what impact measures you were going to use for the programme. And I think it's something that a lot of us working in the charity grapple with. You know, how do we capture and measure impact? And certainly for those of us in What Work centres, we're really trying to build the capacity in the sector for evaluation and for doing more robust evaluations of some of the interventions. So I think it'd be great to share with the audience some of the insights that you had and what you settled on in terms of impact measures.
I'll do my best. I mean, as I said, you know, at Banks we like to measure everything, so it's kind of in our DNA when it comes to what we're doing. I mean, Chris probably could, and please feel free, Chris, do jump in and explain that, you know, if Barclays were a complete pain when it was coming to negotiating what we would measure. But, you know, we've committed to getting 250,000 people back into work globally by 2022. So you can imagine, you know, that's a big number. And obviously now with the pandemic, that's obviously, we've got to repivot that somehow as well. But I think, you know, some of the measures that you'll see in our report, and I must put this in the chat, in the Q&A, sorry, so everyone can access it, but it was things like the number of people, obviously, that, you know, have been either mentored or impacted, the number of people then getting into work, the sustainability rates of that, because there's no points of somebody going into work for a week, although, you know, that happens, you know, absolutely. You know, I think a lot of this was trial and error, and we had to test what works, what doesn't work, what realistically the likes of, you know, Chris and Catch 22 could measure for us and help us with. And then it was all around, obviously, the recruiters. So, you know, that 2,713 people that we've successfully placed into work, working with the likes of Catch 22, you know, that was over 843 recruiters, you know, so we could measure that bit easily because most of them are our clients and we have access to that. But I think that the difficulty was actually, what do we constitute somebody getting into work? Do we measure the number of people that are job ready? And I think one of the things that's really important in this partnership is it should be demand led. So it's not supply led. So it's around what our employers need and where we saw the jobs, or where our clients were sort of telling us they needed sort of certain jobs to be filled. So that was the other piece that also needed to be measured. But I don't know, Chris, if you just want to add anything to that around the process we went through to get to something that we felt that was, you know, measuring the impact.
Yeah, thanks, Nazreen. I think actually it's a really interesting relationship, and as you say, Anna, measuring impact is kind of a holy grail. And how do we really demonstrate impact, and how do we isolate variables and all those kind of things? And how do you ensure that you're really measuring impact and you're not just measuring output? And one of our frustrations around a lot of our government contracts is we use the phrase, we spend a lot of our time hitting the target but missing the point. And I think there's a danger that if you just become totally focused on metrics without really understanding what it is you're trying to achieve, then you end up delivering the metrics, but you don't actually deliver the impact. I think the relationship with Barclays has been brilliant because in many ways that it's obviously this is coming from their citizenship and corporate support area of funding, but they've treated us very much like a contractor. We're a partner, but we're held to account against a series of metrics. But metrics which we've helped devise over the period of time, because I think it's probably fair to say when we first started back in 2016, we probably weren't as focused on measurement as we now are. And certainly the performance since 2018, we've got much more detailed performance metrics and outcomes, measuring of our activity than we had previously. And I think that's because it's been an iterative process. We've worked very well with Barclays. They've held us to account, and we tried to add our insight into sort of things that really matter. But the important thing is, of course, it is about getting people into jobs. It's about sustainability. It's making sure that we're working with the right groups as well, that we're not just placing the easier people into jobs than the people we typically work with, and so it has to be a degree of trust and Nasreen mentioned the quote around transparency, and I think we've been developing a really honest, good relationship where Barclays hold us to account. We push back on things that we think we should push back on, but this is not clear cut. The most important thing is sustainable jobs, I guess, good jobs, however that is defined. But we must also understand the context in which we're operating and not necessarily be so focused on numbers that we miss the point of really what it is we're trying to achieve. I don't know if you can pull anything from that, but it's,
thank you.
Basically, it's not simple.
Yeah, really useful. So in the last few minutes that we've got, it's been great to hear about how the third sector, corporate sector and business are coming together. Seb, I'm not sure how old you are, Beam, but feels like you're still a startup to some degree, really innovative and entrepreneurial, addressing this issue. But obviously you're working in a context where government plays quite a critical role, and in particular, obviously we've seen a huge amount of government intervention in the labour market because of the lockdown. So I just wondered to sort of get a final thought maybe from each of you, just for very brief. What would you want to see the government do next in order to try and ensure that some of the people who are more at risk do have opportunities to get work? So final thoughts on sort of government action post-COVID in terms of employment support. Tim?
Well, two things I can think of. One is that particularly if people are going to become homeless because they've lost their job, and they come to local authorities as a result. I think it's really important that they get the support they need to get back into the labour market as soon as they can. And I think that could be an integral part of the homelessness response. There are already personal housing plans that look at things about how you're going to get into accommodation and so on. But I think if we could manage to bring employment into that, particularly for those who've just come out of the labour market and have a good chance of getting back in there before they get stuck into some sort of cycle of being homeless, that would be very relevant, and government could encourage that. And the other thing I would say is, there could be, more research into things like IPS for homeless people with complex needs, perhaps linked to housing first programs and so on. I think that would be a very interesting thing to try.
Thanks, Tim. Seb, any ideas?
Yeah, a couple of quick things just to echo what Tim said. I think there should be more focus and pressure on employers to play their part here, particularly where they're perhaps benefiting from the pandemic because their business has rapidly increased. It feels like they could do perhaps more to try and help people who are disadvantaged find good quality employment. So I think that's one part. And I think the other part is looking at how DWP can kind of integrate specialist provision more across their current range of services. So kind of one of the real themes that's come out today, I think, from everyone's talk has been that sometimes hard to reach groups do require a slightly different approach. And I think working out how we bring that to as many people as possible is really important.
Thanks very much. Chris?
Just quickly, what I said at the beginning, I think we need to kickstart. And I also think it's a technical point, but there needs to be much more flexibility around the apprenticeship levy.
Okay, thank you. And Nazreen?
Yes, so obviously the government's already incentivising, businesses to, by giving them £2,000 for taking an apprentice under 25. But I think there's more they can do. In this pandemic, for example, the digital transformation, it says that, Microsoft are predicting 3 million new jobs are going to be created as a result of this. So I think there's a real opportunity for really us to leverage that, but with a bit more government support and incentivising employers to take on more people. That would really help, I think.
Great. Well, I've taken a lot from our conversation and just like to thank our panelists for their fantastic contributions. And I really feel that there is common cause amongst those of us who were working on employment support programs where people are facing multiple barriers to really push for and evaluate the impact of these more personalised and tailored support and how that can become the sort of usual business of our employment support and in terms of government programmes as well. So thank you all so much and for your insights as well about how we might engage employers in providing these opportunities and making the case to them for why taking on perhaps some of people who might not be the first in the queue in terms of employees, but can be loyal and add to a diverse workforce. So really great contributions, and I hope you'll be joining other Impact Festival sessions over the course of this week. And I'd just like to finish by thanking the Centre for Homelessness Impact for hosting this seminar, and it can be shared and watched on YouTube afterwards with anyone who may have missed it. So thanks very much, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.